We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
It's March 2022 and we're on top of a cliff on the south coast of New South Wales. I'm there, along with the other members of the DS, to announce the fate of the final 3 SAS recruits. For the last 14 days, they've been pushed to their physical, psychological and emotional limits. Number 7, Riana Crehan, is anxiously waiting shoulder to shoulder with Darius Boyd and Millie Boyle. We started with 14 hopeful recruits, and now just 3 remain. It's time to break the news.
You have all passed selection. Well done.
With 5 cracked ribs and a broken finger, Riana smiles from ear to ear despite the pain. But this isn't Riana's first time smiling through the pain. I'm at Middleton, and this is Headgame. Today, Riana Crehan on the hardest year of her life. My next guest on Headgame is none other than number 7. No, it's not number 7. The SAS days are coming back and she's sweating in front of me right now. So we will dive into that. But we have Riana Crehan. Super honoured to have you here and on my podcast, Riana. Now, we go back quite some, especially with me screaming and shouting at you on SAS Australia. And you obviously making it to the end and passing the selection process. How are you? Have you recovered?
Oh, look, Ant, I'm good, thank you. I'm not sure anyone will ever recover from SAS Australia, but it's probably the number one question I get asked when, people see me, particularly at work at Supercar events, is, what was SAS like? Was it really real? Is he mean? They're like the 3 consistent questions. So,
is he really the a-hole that he comes across?
And I said, no, he's like a gentle giant. Absolutely not mean at all. But look, very fond memories, I think, Ant, from our time there, and an experience that I'm incredibly grateful to have had, because there's no other way that you'd actually get to experience what we experienced. And it's hard to actually explain to people what it was like, because unless you were there and in amongst it and sharing those same memories, it's very hard to put into words. But yeah, fond memories in inverted commas, and it's a great honour to be on your pod, Ant.
You've had a few difficult years leading up to SAS, which we'll talk about briefly. But talk to me about your childhood and where it sort of all started. Were you a fun-loving sort of speed demon because of the cars at a young age, or did you just have a normal childhood?
Oh, look, I would say it was a pretty normal childhood. I grew up in a really loving family. I've got an older sister and a younger brother, and my mum and dad were childhood sweethearts and were together, I think, when they were like 15 and 16 years old. And we grew up, not wealthy, but us kids certainly never went without. My parents worked really, really hard to ensure that we were given the best opportunities we could to succeed in life, and just had a really, really loving family and loving childhood. I grew up on a farm, so I was outdoors all the time, dirty all the time, and I loved it. I'm very lucky that was the childhood that I had. I did dancing as a young kid, and I think that those early days in dancing really instilled a lot of the traits that I carry now, with discipline and working hard and competition and wanting to be the best in everything that I do. And I was dancing from a really young age. Like I think I was like 18 months, 2 years old, and then, right up through to I was sort of 18, 19 years old. And that was at a really high level. So I think that in my childhood really, put me in good shape to work hard and to strive for success, and seeing both of my parents just work really, really hard in order to give us the best opportunities we could. It's definitely shaped who I am. Seeing my dad, work on a farm, 365 days a year. There was no days off for him ever. My mum was a registered nurse, and she still is a registered nurse now to this day. So, they both would work very, very hard and just made sure that us kids had everything we could possibly want.
So did you used to jump in the tractor and drive it at a young age?
Yes.
You loved
Yeah, there was
motorsport,
plenty of that. It was funny though, the motorsports thing came at a when I was older. I didn't have really any interest in motorsport as a kid, but I did grow up loving sport. I, did athletics, I did swimming, I did all those things that kids do, and I was pretty competitive in it as well. And the motorsport thing sort of came into my life as an adult. But yeah, definitely on the farm there was, driving the ride-on lawnmower, there was out in the dirt, there was chasing sheep, all that sort of stuff. And just a really very traditional Australian childhood.
Do you know what? I love that because that's what all kids want to do ultimately, isn't it? That's why I'm all around in the mud. They want to jump on their dad's lap and drive the tractor. Be left, to sort of explore their small world, without anyone telling them what to do or that freedom. It does open your mind up to exploration. It does open your mind up to adventure, doesn't it? As a young
yeah, absolutely. And I think I was always, from a young kid, just wanted to strive for more. Was always just searching to do more and wanted to be the best at whatever I did. And I don't know if that was just came from, my parents or just from what I did when I was, was dancing, was that I didn't want to just, settle for just mediocre. And I think that that's sort of what's carried me throughout, my years.
Motorsport, how the hell did you get into motorsport? Because I suppose when you look at motorsport, it's such a segue from the country life and the
from being a dancer,
from being a dancer to all of a sudden, I suppose, the fast and furious pace of motorsport. How did you get into it?
It was a situation that I kind of fell into. So at the time, I think I was 18 or 19. I was still living in Perth with my family, and I'd finished school and I was going to go to uni, but I went to uni for a few months and then decided, no, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to do a few other things before I actually commit to going to university. And so I was doing I was doing professional dancing work. I was doing modelling work. I was, working here and there. And then this opportunity came up, and they used to have a competition called Miss V8 Supercar back in the day. They don't have it anymore. Sadly, the grid girls are starting to fade away. But back in that day, it was 2005, 2006. And I entered the competition. Mum actually saw the ad and she's like, I think you should do this. So off I went. And turns out I won the competition. So part of that was for the following 12 months, I would travel with the supercars, the V8 supercars, go to all the events, work as an ambassador, so to speak. And that was really my first ever sort of deep dive into what car racing was, and learned very quickly that I really loved it. And towards the end of the year, when that year was coming to an end, I sort of said to the people within the industry that I was interested in working in television. I'd done a lot of drama and musical theatre when I was at school, and that was kind of a pathway that I wanted to head down. And I said, look, I'd like to work in TV. Do you think there's an opportunity for me to do some work experience somewhere? And they essentially said yes. And they said, if you can get yourself to the events and, you've got to sort of find your way, then we'll give you an opportunity. And the next year, that's what I did. I flew myself to the events. I'm not sure that it would be okay to do that now, like in terms of you're doing work experience, but you're covering all your expenses. But I got myself there. I created an opportunity for myself. I started, working within the team, and then it's kind of just, snowballed after that. And I worked hard. I sort of decided that this is what I wanted to do, and I created a job for myself essentially.
But how was it going into an industry? Your blonde hair, blue eyes, and it's sort of a male-dominant industry. How hard was it to break through into that industry?
Yeah, it was really hard, particularly, back then, which is, sort of mid-2000s, I suppose. There wasn't necessarily as many women that you would see nowadays on TV, particularly working in, in a sporting industry, particularly working in motorsport, which was predominantly male-orientated, industry, and very strong men who, like their cars, like their beer, that sort of thing. So for what was I at the time? I think I was 19 years old. I'd come from this pageant background, dancing, modelling, musical theatre, long blonde hair, and just
lamb to the slaughter.
Yeah, and basically it was a lamb to the slaughter. So it was tough. Those first years were brutal. people are very unkind, very, very unkind. And look, I was very green in my career as well. Like I wasn't good. I was okay. I hadn't had a lot of experience. I hadn't gone to journalism at university and studied. And so, I was very, very green in that industry. And I got eaten alive. And there were times in those early days when I thought, is this all worth it? Are the comments on Facebook worth it? Are the comments that you hear behind your back worth it? And I suppose, luckily, I'm pretty thick-skinned. I mean, there were certainly times where I, would be crying in the bathroom going, why am I doing this to myself? But again, it was like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to make sure that, I do what I need to do to be successful. And it meant that I worked harder than other people. It meant that I knew that I had no leeway. I couldn't make a mistake, because if I made a mistake, that was it. I'd be gone. I wasn't given the same sort of leeway as some of the other people I was working with, and that was fine. I understood that was the case, but it just meant that I had to work harder, and I had to make sure that I was, on my A game all the time. And any time I did make a mistake, it was coming for me. That's for sure.
Perseverance. What made you continue to persevere, and what was the turning point where you were, I don't want to say finally accepted, but where you felt like actually, you felt part of the crew, you felt part of the team, and through your perseverance, when was that turning point?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it would have been easier for me to quit, particularly in those early days. Like, I had certainly bosses that were working back in the day that said to me, look, I think you've done a solid job, but this is probably the end of the road for you. Like, I just can't see you go any further. I can't see a woman ever being in pit lane for us. I can't see a female ever like fronting our coverage. And so, the easier thing would be to just shake his hand and say, thanks very much for the opportunity, and go and do something else. But I didn't. I sort of turned that into, I'll show you, mate.
I've seen that side.
You kind of use a few different words, but we'll keep it up. And it was like, a case of, I'm going to prove what you guys are trying to doubt me for, and keep fighting and keep, working my way throughout the broadcast, and eventually was given an opportunity by, another boss to step up into the main broadcast, so to speak. And that was very scary. I was very nervous. I still wasn't great at what I was doing, but he gave me a shot, and I really needed to make sure that I made the most of that opportunity. And that was probably the point where I thought, I didn't think I'd made it, but I was like, I think like I'm on the right path. I'm doing what I should be doing.
Throughout your career, you've dealt with a lot. You've certainly come through everything that's been put in front of you. You're a 100% survivor. You had the toughest year of your life, didn't you, in 2020, before you came on SAS. And, I could see in your eyes that, there was some pain, there was some suffering that you really wanted to sort of purge or deal with. Take me back to 2020 and that year of hell for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think so many people can probably relate. 2020 was such a horrible year for so many reasons. Obviously, COVID was one of the biggest reasons, and the start of the year at my industry in terms of motorsport all started to shut down, and things were starting to look pretty grim in terms of how are we going to continue racing, how are we going to continue working. My husband Will, who races in V8 Supercars, his team actually shut down at the start of the year, so he was essentially left unemployed, totally out of his control at the start of the year, which was a huge blow for us as a family. And then I actually got parked as well from my work because there just wasn't the ability to take everyone travelling throughout the country, given all of the lockdowns that Australia was going through at the time. So it was like a double blow in terms of both of us for employment. And then I got a horrible phone call. A phone call that I'll never ever forget, from my sister, to say that my dad had an event and wasn't likely to survive. So we had to get to Perth. Obviously, we live in Queensland, so that was, up there as one of the worst days of my life. And then we had to deal with the challenge of the lockdowns in Australia at the time, and trying to get into Perth was a challenge in itself. There were so few flights at the time, and we had to really basically plead with the West Australian government to allow us to come in so that I could see my dad. And we were lucky. We were very lucky. We were somehow got a lady who was just very understanding and very empathetic, and she made it work. So we were able to fly to Perth a couple of days later when there was a flight. But I knew that we were flying there to say goodbye. It wasn't going to be a flight for anything else. It was just going to be a flight that we would have to say goodbye to my dad. And so that was absolutely the hardest day of my life.
What was it like during those 2 days of knowing that your father wasn't going to make it, but knowing that those 2 days of waiting and anticipation and obviously thoughts going through your head, of maybe not making it? What were those 2 days like?
Oh, hard to put into words, and obviously just unimaginable grief and sadness knowing, what we were going to be facing when we got there, but just, so much anger at the world, so much anger at, governments in Australia for locking people away and closing borders, and, such mixed feelings because obviously, at the time, everybody believed that was the best thing for the country in order to, for people not to be spreading things around. But, when you're on the raw end of that, it was just anger. You just hated everyone. You hated what was happening, hated the world, hated this horrible virus, hated the fact that, people were getting locked away from their family. And so, 2 days of just living in that space was horrible. It truly was. It's hard. I don't have any other words to describe it. It was just like watching a clock that was ticking so slowly, waiting for those minutes to tick by, waiting for those seconds to tick by, knowing that, we were hopeful that I would get there so that I could say goodbye, but that also wasn't a guarantee. So, we were sitting in this space of, am I going to actually be allowed to go there? Am I going to make it in time to actually say goodbye to him? Hurry up, just please let us get there. Yeah, so there was so many emotions at the time, and I hadn't, even at the time, we were just living in those minutes. We weren't even thinking about what this actually means, moving forward, and the fact that, we're going to lose Dad, and our family was broken, forever. Our family would be broken because of this situation. So yeah, it was horrible. But, at the same time, I look back and I'm forever grateful that I got to say goodbye. There were so many people at that time that couldn't travel to see family, weren't able to have that final goodbye, weren't able to go to funerals. So, I consider myself incredibly lucky that I had that opportunity to say goodbye to him. I had the opportunity to go to Dad's funeral. We were able to have, because we were in Perth, the restrictions weren't so bad, so we were actually able to have a funeral for him. So, I, as much as it was the worst time of our life, I do look back now and think, I am lucky. I had that, because I don't know how it would have been if I, was denied that opportunity. Will and I, we flew from Queensland to Perth, which was, probably one of the worst flights I've ever been on. I didn't know that, all of a sudden you've got no Wi-Fi, you've got no connection, and it's a, 5.5, 6 hour flight to Perth. So for that period of time, again, it was just like a horrible waiting game, looking at the seconds of the clock, looking at the minutes of the clock, and knowing that, what if when we land, I get the phone call to say, we haven't made it on time. So that in itself was awful. And then, arriving to the hospital, we were able to see him in the ICU. He was not conscious. I like to think he knew that we were there, but, obviously we'll never know. And maybe he did know, because he hung on, we got there, and I had a few moments with him before we lost him. So maybe he did know that we were coming and we were on that plane. So But yeah, we had to say goodbye, and then I suppose after that it was dealing with what we've lost, but also then having to quarantine for 2 weeks because these stupid rules at the time. So, I spent 2 weeks then quarantined after saying goodbye to Dad, which was in and itself pretty rubbish situation to be in. But
and then were you by yourself?
I was with Will, so
Okay.
I wasn't totally by myself, but yeah, it was pretty rough. Sometimes you just want to go for a drive to the beach or like just go for a walk and get out in the fresh air, and we weren't able to do that, so that made that pretty tricky. But look, I'm very lucky, Anne. I've got the most. I hit the jackpot with my family. Like my mum, my brother, my sister. My dad. We all are incredibly close. We speak to each other every single day. We are absolutely each other's biggest supporter.
Love that.
And I know how lucky I am that I have that. And so, that time was the worst time for us. But at the same time, we have each other, and we always have been like that. So, as you said, you've got to be able to pull positives out of pretty shitty situations, because otherwise you will spiral. And I suppose I'm grateful that I have that in me. I'm able to see that, when the days are dark, that there's always still hope. Because if you don't have hope, it's pretty grim. So we've just always looked at what we have, and we have each other, and we had amazing times with Dad. We had an amazing childhood. And I'm lucky that I had that.
So you and your husband both lost your jobs. Your father passes away. You're locked down, and you still manage to come through with a positive mindset all the way to 2021 when you decided to do an Ironman out of everything that could have possibly have gone wrong. You did what? When did that decision, come into fruition? When did you think, right, listen, enough's enough. We've got to get back in the game.
Yeah.
I'm going to do an I can understand a half marathon, maybe a marathon, or maybe a little fun run or something. But
Yeah.
an iron, that's hardcore. I know you're hardcore anyway, because I've seen it firsthand. But, someone that's looking from the outside in, your situation of trauma, of dread, of looking into this dark cloud, and all of a sudden you pop out of it and you go, right, this is what I'm going to do. What in the hell made you decide to do that?
Well, to be honest with you, there was dark days. There was really dark days, and there was weeks where I didn't, feel like I had, not that I didn't have anything to live for, but, that I didn't have some purpose, so to speak. I'd lost my job. I had this horrible, trauma with my dad, and it was kind of like, well, what now? Like, I don't even have a job to do. Like, what am I going to do? And, I'd always liked to keep fit, and I'd done I'd done some triathlons and things like that in the past. And there was a good couple of weeks where I literally just didn't get out of bed because facing the world was too hard at the time. I didn't have the energy to be sad. I didn't have the energy to be happy. I just wanted to just sit in, in that space. I really did need to do that. But, then it came a point where I'm like, I can't do this. My dad wouldn't want any of us to be just sitting here and not living. He was all about living and doing, crazy things, and always, was, the life of the party, and was always the person that was helping other people. And I just entered an Ironman, and I'm like, right, this is going to be my purpose for the next, however many months.
Do you know what you're getting into? Or do you just go, oh, I'm just going to enter an Ironman? It sounds cool.
I had a little bit of I did have an idea, but yeah, once I started the training, like, oh wow, this is a lot of training. But it was my reason, it was my thing that every day I didn't have an excuse. I couldn't lay in bed all day. I needed to get up and do the training. I had to get up and ride my bike or go for a run. And I mean, you know what it's like, Ant, just the endorphins and feeling physically good makes you feel mentally good, and just spark something within you when you get moving, and when you start to accomplish things like, okay, I've just done a 10K run, or now I've done a 14K run, or now I've done this, and that all of a sudden you've got that, that feel good energy, yeah, and that purpose, and that's really what got me through those next few months, was the fact that, after so much sadness and bad news and darkness, that, I had something to work towards. And the triathlon community is such a beautiful community. People from all walks of life are doing triathlons, and I've just found it is such a beautiful bunch of people that are so supportive. And I really got into the spirit of it. I was, training every single day. I had a coach who set me out my program and told me what I needed to do. And yeah, I just got stuck in.
You know what? I love that. And I love what you mentioned there about just getting up and moving. And that's why you hear me shout on SAS, move, move, because just that action, no matter how down you feel, and I always say this to people who ask for a bit of advice when they say to me, "And what, I can't get off the couch. I can't get out of bed." And I say, just move. It's so important that when you're feeling like this, when you feel like, you can't go on and that life is too much. And so all I say to people is move. And like you said as well, when you move, it stimulates the mind, because guess what? When you actually move, you are problem solving, 100 things at once, just where subconsciously, where am I going to put my foot? How am I going to balance myself? How am I going to stand up? You subconsciously, your mind kicks in and it triggers stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously you moved in quite a drastic and challenging way.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need to do an Ironman, but
exactly.
But yeah, it's just that it's feeling of accomplishment as well. And even now we've had a pretty rough start to the year. My mum's been unwell, and I would run every day, even though we were visiting her in the hospital, and people would say, why you bother running? And I'm like, because that's what I need. I need to do that. I need. Some people listen to loud music. Some people will meditate. Some people might do yoga. Some people, whatever. But
almost therapy, isn't it?
Yeah, for me, that movement, and it doesn't have to mean that I'm smashing myself and doing a marathon. It's just I just need to get out and just be outside and just moving, and that's what gets me through the tough times.
So moving on to the Ironman, how did you do?
Look, I did okay. I had no goal. Not even have a goal. I wanted to finish. That was my goal. Yeah, I wanted to complete it. I didn't have any, time in my head that I needed to be done by. And to be honest, I just wanted to get to the start line, because if anyone's ever, done an Ironman, they understand that, the training in itself is probably the most difficult part. You're training for a 3.8K swim, 180K bike ride, and then a marathon to finish 42K. So to train for that event, you need to be doing 2, 3, 4 hours a day of training to be able just to get through. So I wanted to get to the start line without being injured and without, burning myself out. And I knew that once I got to the start line that I would get to the finish line. I knew that I would finish it regardless of how long it would take me. And I did. I finished it okay. I had a pretty good swim. My ride was okay. It was a pretty windy day, so there was times during that ride where I wanted to throw my bike off the bridge and never ever see it again. And then the run for me, that's probably my weakest leg. So I knew that, it was just going to be a bit of a shuffle, like a walk jog type thing. And once I got onto the run leg, you're essentially at the end, even though you've got, a marathon to go. But I knew that if I got to that point, I would 100% get to the end and got to the end and crossed the finish line. And I actually, I sculled a VB beer. For Australians, they'll understand.
Wow.
A VB isn't usually the first choice of beer, but that was my dad's favourite beer. And on my hand throughout the day, I'd written a little message in pen. So I knew that there was obviously going to be moments during the day that were going to be tough. And I needed to hang on because Dad hung on for me. So that was kind of what got me throughout the day and crossed the finish line and sculled the beer. And that one was for Dad.
What I love about an Ironman is that you know what you're doing. You just said about the swim, the cycle, the run. However, SAS Australia, you are chucked into the fold. The fear of the unknown, the fear of not being good enough, the fear, you don't know what's happening. You don't know what's around the corner. You don't know how to prepare. You can't prepare. Did you think that the Ironman prepared you for SAS?
No, look, yes and no. Like in some ways, it kind of like obviously cardio fitness. It prepared me.
The physical
prepared me
side,
that,
but the
for that
psychological
part.
and the emotional side.
Look, not completely. I think it put me in good shape to be on the show. I think an Ironman's not easy. It's a hard thing to do, and you're on your own. Particularly when you're on the bike. You're on the bike. I was on the bike for 6.5 hours. So you're on the bike for 6.5 hours, not talking to anyone. You don't have the ability to listen to music or listen to a podcast. It's you, your bike, and your thoughts.
Well, you didn't have the opportunity to listen to Head Game.
I
wonder you didn't come first.
But it's that's a long time where you're in the hurt locker. Your legs are screaming at you. Your back's locked up. Everything's hurting, and you've got your thoughts. And so in a way, I suppose I had a taste of that kind of mentality and a taste of being in that space where it's like you've just got to lock in and you've just got to keep going. But yeah, nothing in the world can prepare you for SAS Australia. Like literally nothing. No podcast will get you through that show.
I love it. So when did the call come up? Let's get straight into it. When did that call come up?
Look,
and did you feel fear? Did you feel excited?
No, I'm an idiot. My manager called me, and it was at the time where my work was still I was in a bit of a weird spot because of COVID, and we still hadn't gone back to regular travel for what I was doing. And my manager called me. He's like, "Look, there's a show, SAS Australia. You've seen it?" I was like, "Yeah, I watched it. Do you want to do it?" "Yeah, sure. Why not?" He's like, "Okay, I'll he's like, "I'll call you in 10 minutes." And he literally called me back and he's like, "You're in." So I didn't think about it at all. Yeah. And then when I told Will, my husband, he's like, "Are you
an idiot
joking?" Like, why would you say yes? And so that was it. I think we had 6 weeks maybe before the show started. I think there was I think that was the lead up time, 6 weeks, 8 weeks maybe at most. So I knew that I was going to be okay in terms of cardio fitness. Like I knew that I could swim, I could run, all that sort of stuff. As you can see, these guns aren't really built for lifting. So I got myself into the gym and just picked up heavy shit basically for 8 weeks. Exactly. And knew that was going to be my weakness. So just lifted sandbags and weights as much as my body would allow me to without getting injured. And then that was it. That was the show.
And take me back to day one. How did that feel?
It was terrifying. And you didn't know how the show was going to work, so to speak. I mean, I'd come from a television background, so I had an idea of how they make TV.
You mean the course? You didn't know how the course.
Yeah, didn't know how the course was going to play out. And as you hear about how shows are filmed, other reality TV shows are filmed, and it's like, okay, they'll do a scene, and then it's like the producer will interrupt, and then a director will say, "Oh no, we've got to do that again." But obviously that wasn't how SAS Australia worked. It was once you told us to get off that boat, we were in your world, and it was terrifying. It was truly terrifying. It was very intimidating, obviously not just from yourself and from the other directing staff, but from the people that I was on the course with. I was, I'm not a known person in the media. I'm not an athlete. I'm not an Olympian. And, you're standing there and you're looking around and you've got Jeff Hugel there. You've got Melissa Wu there. We've got Wayne Carey. We had Barry Hall. We had Marco Zarafa. Like we had so many people that were these incredible athletes who had enormous success in their life. And I'm sort of standing there looking at them like, how on earth am I supposed to even remotely be, considered on the same playing field as these people around me? And big personalities who, were quite overwhelming when you first get in because everyone, is wanting to, have their voice heard. And I'm quite a quiet, shy person in real life. Even though I work in TV, in my personal life, I'm not the loudest person in the room. And if anything, I like to be the quietest person in the room, particularly when I don't know people. So I think that's what I did. I was pretty quiet, didn't want to make too much noise and just sort of go under the radar and try not to get your attention, because if you got your attention, usually it's because you've done something wrong.
Correct. Very wise, I would say. What's it like amongst from the very first day? What's it like amongst the recruits?
I mean, it was pretty obvious from the outset, who was going to be the, not alphas, but like the louder people, the people that sort of speak the most and put themselves forward the most. It was quite obvious, who those people were going to be. But to be perfectly honest, I felt like our group was a really supportive group. For the most part, everyone was a big supporter of each other. There wasn't necessarily anyone who was trying to be the best or always, wanting to, out race or outdo anyone else. Like I felt like particularly the guys like Barry Hall and Darius Boyd and Wayne Carey, Jeff Ugle, like they were all very good supporters, particularly of us girls. Even though they might be stronger than us and be able to carry heavier things than us, like they were always our biggest champions, throughout the tasks and always wanting to make sure that we didn't ever feel that we were lesser than those guys. And I think it showed at the end of the show when there was more women than men towards the end. I think it really did show that we were successful because we had people, supporting us so much, right from the outset.
That's why everything is put on a base level. That's why there's no heavier weight in the women's berg or heavier weight in the men's bergen and in the women's berg, because we're testing you physically, psychologically and emotionally. Yes, the men might be physically stronger and maybe, I wouldn't say fitter, but physically stronger. But when it comes to the psychological side and the emotional side, it would be unfair to make it easier for women on the physical side, because actually psychologically and emotionally, one, you don't know what's going on up there or what people have been through. So, that's a level playing field. And the emotional side, from what I've seen, is that women actually deal with their emotions a little bit better than me. So, it's important that people realize that that's why we keep the course the way it is, and everyone's on the same playing field. Because when we test you physically, psychologically, and emotionally, if there's a disconnect between the trilogy and you can't hack it psychologically, then you're gone. Emotionally, if you can't do some of the fear-defying tests, heights, water, phobias, you're gone. Physically, if you're not up to scratch, you're gone. So, when did you start to because you came into your flow after the first 4 or 5 days? You see people, who you thought, wow, are going to be here at the end, start leaving. And you start to get into your flow, don't you? You start to realize, do you know what? I've just got to let go. I've just got to embrace the course and let myself go.
And I think that's the key, to be honest, is that just knowing that you've got to, just let the show take care of itself. Like you've lost all control. Like you don't choose when you eat. You don't get to choose when you sleep. You don't get to choose what you're doing. You don't know what's happening. You don't have any sort of idea of how the day is going to roll out. And the minute that I was able to, in my head, go relinquish control and just deal with the situations as they come, I think that's when you really start to be able to just process things in time. So it's like, okay, this is the task we're doing now. Yeah, be present, and this is the task we're doing now. Deal with this task, and everything else that comes after it, we'll deal with that after. Like we're eating now, like eat your food now, and then think about what's happening after that. And I think that that definitely took a couple of days just to get used to that and get used to the fact that you have no idea and you have no control over anything whatsoever. And once you do see some of the people like start to not struggle, but there's areas in their life that they're they might be really physically strong, but then they weren't able to do this particular task. And you're like, okay, well, I'm not the strongest, but I was able to do this, or I'm able to problem solve this, or I've been able to do this, and exactly. And that's when after the first few days, I was like, okay, I think I can get through this. And I knew in my head that I wasn't going to quit. Like there was no part of me that was going to give you my number. You would have had to take my number. And I didn't think that I would get to the end, but I didn't think that I would give up. I knew that you would have to get rid of me.
Was there any stage that you thought that your number was close to coming off? Or
I think at the end, I think it was the second last day or third last day, and we were down to 4. Were we down to 4? And
5 a year, yes, right.
we were all tethered on the rope, and you took us to some mud swamp, mangroves, and it had been raining and it was freezing cold, and we were all tethered, and we basically had to, run from one end to the other to retrieve the package or whatever it was. And
it was
if you
sensitive mission,
it was time sensitive,
Also, the whole idea of this was to either sacrifice yourself if you think you're holding the team back, or the team had to
say sort of your time's done. And we also were carrying I think 20 kilos or something. Right. And so, I felt like I could have done the task, but carrying the package as well as running through the swamp, I was starting to struggle physically. And we were with Lockie, so we had Lockie Gilbert, Darius Boyd, Millie Boyle, myself, and Melissa Wu. And Melissa was also starting to struggle, and I think she got dropped. So then we were down to just the 4 of us, and it meant that Lockie and Darius had to do a lot of the heavy lifting because I just wasn't able to physically hold the package as long as what they were able to. And this is day 12 or something. It was pretty close. It was quite,
it was.
So there was a point there where I thought, is it better for me to not give up, but is it better for the team that I unhook myself, because I think I'm now starting to bring them down. And then this recurring thought in my head always throughout the whole entire time was like, this will end. This task is really hard now, but it will end, and then you'll be done with it, and you'll never have to do it again until the next time we do a task. But everything ends, every beasting ended, and every task would end, and every, whatever it was. And in my head, I'm like, no, don't quit now. We might have another 10 minutes, we might have another hour, but it's not forever. You can hang on.
That one felt like forever though. I think I smashed you for a good 5K through the mangroves.
And then you made us run back to the vehicles as well afterwards. But that was probably the only time throughout all of it where I was very close to going, I think that I need to sacrifice myself because the team is now starting to, become slower because of me.
What was it like standing there at the end? So you stood there. Did you care if you passed or failed at this stage?
I did, yeah. I think because you got so far, and I would have hated to get that far, and then you just say, oh, you haven't passed. So it was a surreal moment. It was hard to actually comprehend that you'd said we'd all passed, and to be alongside Millie and Darius was just amazing. A moment, and I think because it was a TV show, but it was more than that. It was more than a TV show. It was an experience of my life that showed how strong I was, and it was a bit of it was like a relief after all the horrible things that had happened in the year prior, and the horrible times that my family had had, and the hard days. And it was like, I did it. I actually, it was kind of like it was like the moment I felt like I got through. I got through more than what the TV show was. I got through 12 months of hell, and I did it, and I survived, and yeah, it was more than what just passing a TV show was. It meant more.
You feel like you can tackle anything after, don't you? Your self-belief, your self-confidence. How well has that served you? Because when I look at most of my recruits that succeed, and I look at their careers, because I do follow you very closely, whether you like it or not, I've always got an eye. You seem to just just go, and I'm not saying that you'll succeed at everything that you do, but you don't seem unfazed with life. You feel like you can tackle anything. How important was that course for your self-confidence and self-belief?
Oh, it was huge. I think, when I walked into that room the 14 days beforehand and being really intimidated and quite, that real imposter syndrome, I absolutely, I shouldn't be here. I don't deserve to be here. I'm not a famous person. I'm not an athlete, all that sort of stuff. I'm not the strongest person here. And then to be there standing at the end, and it does huge things for, self-confidence and just not having belief in yourself, and having the confidence to go, even though this is scary, or this is a huge fear for me, it's like you've just got to charge forward, and you work out the rest, and it was massive. And I think for me, because what had happened in the year before, it was a real this is the start of the next chapter for me. Like, it'd been a really hard year. I'd lost my job. There was lots of uncertainty with what was happening with myself. And it was almost like, yeah, this is the turning point for me, for my career, for what I do with my life, for how I see things, making sure that I make the most of every opportunity that comes before me, whether that be just in my personal life, saying yes, doing things that I want to do for myself. And it was a huge shift in my mindset into like, right, we only have this one very short life that is so precious. And I've been given this opportunity to listen to yourself, to listen to all of the other directing staff for the last couple of weeks. And you guys were, so gracious in sharing some of the stories that you guys have had in the things that you've done in your lives and what you've experienced, and how lucky I was to be part of that and have that very unique experience that not many people in this world will get. And I need to now use this and do the things I want to do in my life.
Riana, if you're the epitome of seize every opportunity, then you've certainly shared that message there. Final question for you. Since then, since your fractured ribs and your broken finger, and now that you've fully recovered, you've since had a beautiful baby boy. Now, is he a future SAS recruit?
Oh, look, he has unbelievable upper body strength. He can hang off a bar better than I can. So you just never know. But maybe they can do. There's been a few babies since our season, so maybe they can be an SAS kids, and all the babies and all the kids can come together. But life has changed a lot. I've had a baby. He's 19 months old now. He's just the best thing ever. He's changed my life for so many different reasons, and he's just brought so much love and joy to me and my family and my mum in particular. So he has been the absolute, just shining light for our family. And lots of different things have happened, but I feel like now, we're just in a good spot. Life is challenging. Life is never easy. It's never still. Even this year, I've learned that things can very easily turn around, but it's just a case of, making the most, as you said, of those opportunities and living life, like not just cruising and coasting through, like actually get out there and live and love hard. And, because as I've experienced, you just absolutely never know what's going to happen.
I love that. If you're being challenged, then guess what? You're living, because you're thinking, you're growing, and you're becoming a better version of who you are. Riana, I've loved having you on. I love seeing you, and I'm going to nab that little one up of yours. He's going to be a future SAS Australia recruit. But I wish you all the best for the future. I'll be seeing you real soon. Thank you ever so much for coming on Head Game.
Thank you.
To find out more about Riana, head to rianacrehan.com. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Head Game. If you love listening to this podcast, please share it with a friend, or you can leave me a review on your favourite listening platform. I'm Matt Middleton. See you in the next episode.